Yeah, he did so.
It's because he's done it like.
It is 4:00. Board members will go ahead and start the meeting. Our first item is the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Vice Chair, please read our mission statement.
The mission of the Marshall Public School District is to educate, support, and prepare all learners for success.
Thank you. Approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
So moved. I'll second.
Any additions? Hearing none, please vote. It is approved. Higher spotlight.
Hey, this evening, we'd like to recognize our student school board representatives. Thank you, Spencer, Ayan, and Samia, for your work as student school board representatives. During your 2-year term, you've experienced many situations that have allowed you to learn and grow as a public service volunteer. We've enjoyed getting to know you and wish you all the best in your future.
Thank you.
We do have a little gift for you.
You're gonna miss us, I know.
Yeah. Here.
Not the right place for us.
Yeah, Samia.
Maybe you guys stand and I'll take a picture with your certificate. Mr. Chapman?
With me, okay. I just go like with this. You guys come in the middle. All right, there we go. All right, thank you.
Spencer, that book is for you to write down the numbers of the cute chicks at Bethel.
Okay, that's your black book. Okay, we'll stop.
Yeah.
Moving on to our public forum, this is the time the public can approach the board. Moving on to our presentation, budget presentation. Welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right, just dive right into it here. Just want to point out some of the things, as you guys know, that drives what our revenue is based off of. Student enrollment, we explained last year, we saw some leveling off, and we experienced that again in 2021. I think we feel a little bit that that has to do with COVID. We're expecting in 21-22, estimating enroll with a slight increase, and hopefully see that trend continue. Another factor that comes into play with our revenue is the open enrollment. The two comparisons show the 2021 compared between those who open enrolled into Marshall Public Schools and then also the Marshall Public School resident students that attended another school outside of the district. We saw the numbers decrease from 1990 in both of those categories, and did see the gap narrow in 2019 and 2020. There were 246 open enrolled into Marshall Public Schools, and there were 259 Marshall Public School residents that open enrolled into other districts. In 2020 and 2021, there were only 232 that open enrolled into Marshall Public Schools, but the number did decrease of the Marshall Public School residents that open enrolled into other districts to 237. Closing the gap, last year there were a -13 down to a -5. Those numbers don't include our Maytech students, which we have 19 students open enroll, and we will continue to have that discussion in our office of how to close that gap and maybe even have it go the other way. Couple of very important demographics at our school, free and reduced. We saw a sharp decline this year. As you can see, the previous 3 years, we showed us a steady increase in our free and reduced. This year is a direct result of our free breakfast and lunch. It's a great thing for our students and families to be able to have. We were unable to get the number of free and reduced applications submitted to MDE as we have in the past. Percentage down from 47.1 to 41.5. And I'll show you later on how that's going to directly affect our funding for next year. And then you can see our special education also took a little dip, not quite as bad. There again, probably resulting because of the COVID situation. Minority demographics. This one too, as you see, the past 3 years, we had a nice increase each year. 2017 and 18, there were 412 students. 18, 19, 434, 19, 20, 429, which was a little less. But in 2021, we saw a fall to 371 students. And we can point out COVID, but we're also going to research that a little bit. That was a pretty good, decent decrease that we want to make sure we understand what that is that families moving out, make sure we're reporting.
At one of our receptions that I was at yesterday, there was a teacher from Worthington with whom I was speaking. And she said their minority population in Worthington is 80%. Demographics.
I know it's important to this board and our community, our staffing to class size. These will show what the 21-22 projection is off of the student enrollment that we're projecting. Everything falls pretty close to in line. Our kindergarten is just a little over the 20 students per teacher, but that's where we fall in, and we talk each year about having a kindergarten aide in each class. Some of our other classrooms, second grade, they're showing 21, almost 22 to 20, which is a good number. We start rebounding back. Third grade is that bubble that's going through the school system. We have that small. Actually, it will be the 4th year next year that will go through the school system. So we reduced our third grade from 8 to 7 classes, still putting it under that target guideline. The other one is the middle school, which is has some growth coming into it, still within line on most of those, very close to the target. And then high school, try to stay at that 28 students per teacher-based type class. You know, we'll be seeing quite a increase in our middle school numbers being so high when they get to the high school. We're going to see a good increase, and I think we all knew that was coming. Special ed, this just outlines what the per teacher target guidelines are for each area, each grade level. We'll kind of get into the rest of the budget breakdown for you guys. So I did this a little different this year because of how the past year or two has differed. We used to be able to just take the last 3 years or even the last year and show what the differences were, but there's so many variables with COVID over the past year and a half that affected, went back to the 18, 19, 19, 20 year to kind of give an idea of where we're standing this year and projecting next year outside of the COVID realm. Salaries again fall in line with the past 2 years. We experienced some savings due to staff retirements. Also some salary savings from the closure of our daycare. The savings from the daycare salaries will just be a little over $279,000. On the other side, we're using ESSER funds to continue with the continued COVID positions such as our extra custodian, our nurses aide, and our extra parent student connectors. Those were important positions to continue since we have the ESSER funds next year. So
And the ESSER funds for 2 more years, Dan?
Okay.
The ESSER funds are available to us for 2 more years?
Yep, I'll show you coming up. I got to break it for you. So with that, even though we have the ESSER funds, we have to code the expenditures separate. So you're going to see some of that also. Benefits, you'll see that leveling off a little bit. That's because all of the above holds true with some of our savings, between daycare and our retirement. We see a little savings there. Along with that, we did experience about a $14,000 savings with that 8% decrease in health insurance premiums. And you'll also see in the benefits a decrease of $47,000, which was the health incentive. Even though we get the revenue, we have to report the expenditures. So the health incentive technically go away. So you'll see a decrease of $47,000 in expenditures. And lastly, our support staff, when they negotiated their agreement, had their insurance increase in 2021 with no increase in 21-22. I do like to see the graphs. I would like to see them a whole lot, but that's probably never going to happen with our benefits. But to see that steady, consistent growth and not a spike. It's good to see. Purchases, purchase services, capital expenditures and supplies. For purchase services and capital expenditures, you'll see an increase in 1920 over 1819. I just want to point that out, that big jump there was because of our safety and security project at West Side at the middle school. You'll see a decrease of 2021 over 1920 due to that. 21-22 both back in line. Oh. So when you're looking at the, basically we've got 1920, which had that. 2021, we're looking back in line. We go there and purchase services. Supplies even more shows, obviously supplies in 2021 with COVID, we had our PPE, some other things that we had to purchase due to COVID. So back in 1920 to 21, 22, it shows more of a steady growth. That gives a breakdown of our general ed expenditures. I want to go into a little detail when it comes to our 21-22 general ed revenue. Obviously, we're waiting for our legislature to act. There's a lot of things out there between the House, Senate, Governor. So putting together this budget, preliminary budget, we used the guidelines that the board approved back in December, 1% increase. Hearing, from 0 to 1 to 2. We felt a 1% increase was safe. We also have a couple other things that are coming into play that I wanted to point out as we end up looking at our deficit spending for 21-22. I think it's very important to point out, and the percentages I have on the side is the snapshot of October 1st. Graph I had before, I believe, is an active current percentages for our grade reduced. Our revenue is off with the October 1st snapshot. So our compensatory revenue is based off our free and reduced numbers. This is calculated off the free and reduced applications we receive and submit by October 1st of the previous year. It kind of seems a little weird, but for fiscal year 2020, the applications we receive and approved by October 2018. So the revenue we receive in 2020 is actually for the applications in 2018. Fiscal year 2021, applications received and approved back in October 2019. So for next year's fiscal year 22, it's the applications received and approved last October 2020. with breakfast and lunches being free, like I explained before, in 2021, the number of free and reduced applications are considerably less. You would think that a percentage of 46 to 38 isn't much, but you'll see it off to the side, over $500,000 that we're losing in revenue due to that.
Question, Deanna, and maybe you're gonna get to this,
Yep.
but with the ESER two and the ARP yet to come, do we anticipate that we would be able to reimburse ourselves to cover that loss if we can contribute that to COVID?
I'll show you, coming up. Yeah, I believe, yes, I believe lost revenue we can, but we're using our ESER two funds, so I'll kind of break that down. And totally open to the board's conversation on it too, of how we're using it, how we're spreading it out. To basically survive over the next 3 years. So I just want to point out, this is not Marshall Public Schools, a problem with Marshall Public Schools, this is a statewide problem. Very important, I know some of our agencies, like MREA, MSBA, ASBO, are all, going to legislature trying to get this hold harmless. It is a big number. Other districts in our area I've seen as high as 1.3, $1.5 million they're losing in 1 year due to this. They extended it, the free app, free and reduced apps. We did more than I think we ever had this year. We'll do even more next year because we have free and reduced or free lunches and breakfast. We're going to see the same thing, if not worse. We do have some tools that when we send this out, we'll try to get some free and reduced apps in. It's one of our main goals, I think, this summer is to figure out how to do that.
It's always been like pulling teeth on the end.
It has, but
It's
when
a
you're,
tough one.
when the meals are free,
Yeah.
why fill it out?
Yeah, it just makes it more difficult for sure.
So anyway, both Jeremy and I have talked, early on, we heard about the hold harmless, we haven't heard anything since. Our point on this is the federal ESSER money is one-time money. Does not offset this loss. So I say I'll allow it as we go through this deficit spending. A lot lies on what legislature does. We can do what we can do, but in the end, when you're losing over $500,000, it's hard. It's a hard revenue to lose. So, anyway, this. So as we talked about using the 1% increase, this is the slide that I used back in December for truth and taxation. Just updated it off the numbers that I found with the increase in inflation. I believe it was as of April 2021. So for 2021, it had projected $77,070. That has increased to $7,136, like I said, as of April. It was around a 7.7% gap, or $503. It's now, from inflation to where we're at with our general fund formula, increased to $569. The reason I point that out is, along with the compensatory, our estimated 1% for 21-22 would be around $165,000. So if you combine the 536 and the 165, we're talking $702,000 in lost revenue. Again, which lies in our legislature's hands. This is not new money. Technically new money with the 1-2% increase, but these are revenues that just come every year. So I wanted to point that out as we jump into the general fund revenue. Starting off at the top, just point out a few things. Good news is our participation fees, admissions, and concessions compared to last year, we should see those rebound. So that'll be revenue continued back the way it was. So that will help there. daycare revenue, as we talked, projecting about $200,000 in revenue. Our expenditures offset that loss, so we should see a savings there. Down below, general aid with the formula, everything included, we're looking at about a $55,000 increase. Basic skills is where compensatory is put into. So even though I showed 536,000, there's other things that go into basic skills, so it's showing that total line item is 527,000. And then the last thing to point out here, under state revenue, our special ed revenue. Last couple of years, I used the projection module that MD provides. Not finding that it's really coming out to where we end up. So reverted back to the 3-year average, which what we used in the past. Not an exact number, but a lot closer than what we've used in the past. And then I separated out the insurance recovery and the MD safety and security. Insurance recovery back in 1920, that was the high school gym that we received the insurance funds to help with that. And then the MD safety and security, as you guys know, is the West Side Middle School security that we received grant money for. Both fall under a general fund, but I want to separate that out. So when you see a 0 on the other end, you know what that's for. Our levy, talk about our levy in December. We are showing a total of $148,000 increase in levy revenue, which is good. Up from compared to 1920 to 2021. Title overall, we're projecting about $11,000 increase. We've heard some news on the title that they might actually do home permits on that. Title I money, but we're not putting that out there right now until we get firm answer on that. And then ESSER funds, got it there, and we'll come back to that. I broke it down a little bit here to kind of show you guys what the timeline is, what's involved, what we have received, what we've expensed, and received those funds. So over on the left, we have ESSER 1. They have broken down the ESSER 1 funds between 3 different funds. I would just focus and call them ESSER 1 funds. We received about $397,000. By the end of this fiscal year, June 30th, we'll have that expense that we're receiving. Okay, that along with the CRF, which is the COVID relief funds. COVID relief funds had to be expensed, and by December 31st of 2020, we were able to do that. Those funds there went towards the extra transportation. PPE was around, I have to look just to make sure, but around a couple $100,000. We had the additional custodian, nurses aid, several things. We were able to use some of this money to help out with our one-on-one event, which benefits us down the road. So we had to use the ESSER 1 funds by September 30th, 2020, but we also have to use the ESSER 1 funds before we can access the ESSER 2 funds. ESSER 2 funds become available July 1st of 2021, and we're eligible to use them until September 30th, 2023. We are budgeting to use 100% of the ESSER 2 funds in 21-22 fiscal next year. I kind of went down a few things on that to help out, and it kind of convolutes it a little bit. Is we're using some of that for our one-to-one devices, which we use capital and general funds for. When you use the ESSER funds, so we're zeroing out the capital, and now all the expenditures are in general fund, but we're offsetting that with the ESSER 2 revenue. So it looks like the expenditures are going up, the capital is going down, but in reality, they're offsetting. If you run this code in our finance program, it ends up with expenditures and revenue. Besides the one-to-one, we are planning on some recoding some of our cleaning supplies to ESSER 2 to help offset some of the expenditures, as well as some of our new staff salary benefit. ESSER three funds, Bill, we were talking about. Those, we're signing the law, they just became available on serves. I don't know for sure, honestly. I think they're available July 1st of 2021 also. There are a couple of extra things we have to do with the ESSER three to be able to have those funds become available. Here we're not going to meet on Friday to go over those. Those funds are available through September 30th, 2024. Our plan or thinking is to offset some of the deficit spending is to split that into 2023 and 23-24. As we've talked about before, and I'll bring it up again a little later, an operating referendum that ended in June 30th, 2018, about $1.6 million a year. The district and the board has done a nice job to maintain our expenditures and buy down a little bit on the general fund over the past couple of years. At some point, even with these funds, we're going to have to visit about that, especially when we're losing about 70 or 700,000 in revenue, depending on legislature. So we come back here, as you see, we have expensed the full $101.5 million in ESSER two funds. We do have, there is another fund out there called the Governor's Discretionary ARP Funds, 106,000. That's to be used for summer school. What we don't use this year, we claim it as we get it, like title funds, we don't get it, and that's important too. All these federal ESSER funds, we don't get those funds. We have to expense them, submit them, and then we get the revenue. Same would be for this here. Whatever we don't use this summer, we could carry it over to next summer, but we will expense out as much as we can use this summer. Overall, we're looking at $798,317 deficit. I would just, again, I hate to revisit it, but revert it back to this year. If we were to receive that money this year, we'd be looking at almost a break even. Kind of pause there. That's the main fund, if anybody has any questions. Okay. So transportation. This again is going to look a little skewed due to COVID, but we've got our 3% increase for next year, and then I believe it goes down to a 2% increase for the next years after that for our contract with Southwest Coaches. This is going to revert back to previous discussions where the revenue does not align with the expenditures. So we're looking at about a $74,000 deficit spending in the fund. And later on, I'll show you where that transportation fund balance ends up after this year. Capital outlay, and I combined transportation and capital outlay right after general fund because in MBE's eyes, they are actually one fund, we break them out. Capital outlay and FTFM are part of the capital outlay funds. Capital outlay expense shows a decrease. This is due to our budget numbers the previous year and shifting some of those to general fund like we were talking about, being able to use the ESSER two funds. This would also be a line that our one-on-one devices and online platforms would be, in which we're able to use some of those ESSER funds. We do have one of our larger thank you. Our MAP is due next year. So that is one of our highest numbers. Otherwise, that would probably be long-term facility maintenance expenditures will increase in 21-22. Presented that last month to you guys, so you can see what we're using those funds for. Appreciate your guys' willingness to spend down on that fund balance, to be able to get some of our projects done. So overall capital fund and capital outlay fund shows an increase of $14,680. And below you can kind of see the graphs help to show where our spending and revenue. So summary of all three of those funds. We're looking at a deficit spending of about $857,635. That will include transportation and our capital.
Your projection on budget for reserves, was that dropped down to percentage wise?
I will show you coming up. I've got that all the way down. I would say, shouldn't say, in my gut, I believe that 2021 is going to turn out better than what we had projected, which will help. And understand this is preliminary budget. Hoping that this is worst case scenario. So by the time we get to the revised budget, we'll know more. Food service, this one is all over the place too, as you can imagine. We've got things like our payroll. Our, contracted services should actually hopefully be a little less this year with not having to do this fall, the grab and go bags, potentially. We've got our supplies, you can see a big dip there. A lot of that's going to do with the grab and go bags and some other things. We do include about $45,000 of that is equipment that we budget for. Work with Taher, Warren to get together a list of different equipment that we think might come up that needs repair. So we have that available. Revenue, again, is going to look way different than previous years. Our state funding is going to basically be with the free breakfast and lunch this fall for next school year. Our federal funds, as you can see, should increase some with the switching to the SSO this fall. So the summer food service program, it does give us a little more revenue return. So we should see an increase there. And we should also hopefully see an increase in our olive card. Do not go back to what was previous, but it would be the hope that we could return to a number like over 100,000. We'll have to see what happens this fall with the free breakfast and lunch. So overall, with our food service, we are looking at 23.7 as an increase. So that's good. We're back to an increase in food service. So kind of show you two. Again, last year is going to look a little odd, but going to 1920 or even 1819, we're showing back where our revenue always our expenditures. Community services expenditures don't change much. As you can see over here, our ECFE does increase a little bit, and that's because we have added a couple of part-time positions, which will be now over the park side of the new addition. Community services and ADE budgets are somewhat neutral. And then the ECFE shows an increase in revenue also down here. We should see an increase in some of our fees for those classes, hopefully next year with COVID. Debt service decrease in the expenditures is due to what our premiums. The expenditures are basically what our premiums and interests are due that year. Our interest actually goes down on one of our bonds, so we see a decrease in that expenditure. And then our revenues, you can see, we've got our sale of bonds last year. We won't have that this year as far as we know. There. Overall, we're looking at an increase of about $407,000. We do levy for our QZAP bonds, which will become one payment. It's 2024 that first one is due. So we put that money into that account. So, Mr. Chapman, you were looking for, basically what we're looking at is the top shows revised budget where we're projecting to end up. Is that we're hoping that this number ends up a little better than what was projected. We'll have to see from audit, some state money that comes in all the way through October. So for next year, projection of the 798,000 deficit, our ending balance will go down to about $4,860. Talked about transportation with about $74,000 deficit spend. That would bring our fund balance down to about $171,000. Got a couple of years to try and figure things out to level that up. So as we talk about percentages, 1920 actual, we're at 16.5% in our general fund balance. 2021, if everything holds true, that would reduce it to a 15.16%. And 2021, if it holds true, at $798,000 deficit, could be at about a 12.27%. Which holds us close to still over that 8% fund balance minimum that's set by the board. The additional federal funds are going to help the ESSER 3 funds. But and I can't say it enough, with the legislature possibly not passing some of that funding and inflation keeping up and actually rising higher than what was projected, probably going to be looking at deficit spending another third year. Start putting some operation referendum in the talks. Deficit spending as a result of allowing our last operating referendum to expire in 2018. I discussed was about $675 per student ADM, which is the average daily attendance, which brought in over 1.5 million additional revenue each year. Rate that we were able to not have it for the last 3 up to 4 years, which helped to give a little tax break to our community. But as prior, if we're going to be able to keep our class sizes where they are and the programming that I think the board and the community wants us to be at, it's definitely something we're going to have to start on. With that, we still have a lot to celebrate. Very awesome new building addition. We're a new son-in-law. We don't have to wear masks anymore. So, any questions you guys have?
Not sure. We talk a lot about in these meetings about the tie-in to the free and reduced lunch to all these funding sources that I don't think people make that connection like in the general public.
We should, because it's right in our letter we send out to we send it out to all families, and right in there we outline what revenues we receive due to that. But with that, I mean, we'll keep talking about, we talk plenty, I know Bill brings up a lot, their Title I funds are tied to it too. But
One of the problems is getting people to apply.
Right. I mean, I'm just thinking as a parent, you get, at least when you're younger, you get like a whole sheet, 1,000 different things at once, and it's very easy to be like, go through them.
Right in the fall, yeah.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to try to get small groups to actually sit down with those, you know what I mean, just as an idea of not making it so it's part of all of the other.
it's, it's actually a separate mailing. That's a good idea. We have the help of our PSCs, our student connectors, to help with some of the minority groups that go out directly. They help them fill out the forms to a certain point, and then they have to fill out the forms. We have a somewhat of an initial plan to make the letter that goes out more of a bullet point of what benefits they get, as well as the benefits to the district. The problem, some of it is there's a 5 factor to it. So the one receive it and probably would qualify. Which when they bring it in, it's not public information. We just need to find, just like we do with keeping our open enrollment, kindergarten, things have changed and we need to market things differently. We need to ask parents to read their mail, honestly, because there's a lot of things that come into the school district. We need their input. We can send out the Blackboard Connect, but I can guarantee you, some people just hang up on the Blackboard.
I'm just thinking too, a lot of people, at least in my client work, a lot of people wouldn't believe they would qualify either. So there is this, there's the pride factor, but there's also this other segment too, that just would think, oh, there's no way. But those guidelines are fairly generous
I
too.
think you have a good point to start that letter. It's, like Dan mentioned, it's long and it's
Yeah.
cumbersome. There's so much coming at you in the fall. It's
Yeah.
easy to put aside,
Yeah.
especially when there's no free lunch tied to it, because everyone gets the free
Right,
lunch.
but also
Yeah.
the people that are like, well, I make too much, they're not gonna read into those little
The
tiny
letter show
paragraphs.
the income limit for the.
I don't know if it does, but it's buried. I mean, I remember getting that, and I mean, it's
Well, it should be in
lengthy.
the top somewhere.
At least when I hit it.
And we talked
So-
about that, and we'll keep doing better with it. Last year, we talked about it, we did simplify the cover letter because honestly, the wording of it was so of what it even was for. And I think it was a general letter that we sent out.
A lot that we get to put on our letterhead and
Yeah.
distribute.
Sure.
So we'll continue to do that to make it easier to understand what is to follow in that.
Yeah, and I'm even wondering if the applications could be, I mean, because you always do better, I think you do better talking to people than expecting them to read it, if there's a way to tie it to open houses or parent teacher conferences, to have actually people who are, have a table there and say, hey, come over and talk to us and walk them through it and be able to, discuss, here's the guidelines, here where you may qualify, here's what it gives the district.
I do
It's
agree,
easy for people
but
to,
understand.
We have done that.
but now everything's computer, I mean, so much of it's computer online, do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? I'm just suggesting if people, if there was more publicity around what impact that does have, I don't see there being.
I agree if we can do it. I understand too, we have to have these applications done and submitted by October 1st, so.
But when do they apply? When does it come out?
This year, we're gonna jump on it right away in July.
I mean, just, because that's what I'm wondering, if, depending on, I was thinking anything with open houses, if you could somehow put it in to be able to put it in July or something.
Kindergarten.
Kindergarten
roundup,
benefit,
if we
yeah.
could, if we could make them aware of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the application comes available sometime in July and we have to have them filled out.
I knew you'd have to have them by October, I understood that piece, but I was just saying, if there's that many touches, people. More you talked about.
I know in California, it's mandatory, everyone fills one out. Kids do, so every student fills one out. Yeah. And then they go through the process of some qualify, and the ones that don't fill, they actually have to turn them in. The other thing is that, when we look at, when we go back to charging for lunch, our regular lunch program was less charged than what a reimbursement was, which didn't make sense. If the government's going to reimburse you this amount, it should charge at least something.
I was just gonna say, the other complicating factor on this is part of the reason we have a budget surplus statewide, because the state didn't pay these dollars out to school districts because they're getting the federal grant.
But very good, I mean, you saw in the slide, we're getting about $5,000 from the state and funding from the state, those dollars now are compensatory. And I totally agree. We're gonna hit this thing hard because it hits us hard. In the end, I think we're gonna put a lot of work in for a minimal percentage and we'll do it. We'll definitely do it. See us probably getting up to 38%. I joke.
And that's
with Christian the other-
true in the past, because we had some real heavy initiatives when I was elementary principal. I would talk to parents personally, and many times parents didn't want to rebuild their anything. And other times, parents saw it as a welfare program, and they didn't want to be part of that. So that's part of the mix. It's not an easy one for people to do, but if we can mandate it, if your child is attending here,
And kind of back to what you're saying too, I think there's some families that don't think they qualify. They do. I had one family that qualified 1 year and they didn't submit it last year because they got a different job, still wouldn't qualify. Just filling out the application, no matter who you are. It's interesting, I know it's a lot of work that Jill and Tricia to go through those, but it pays off so much for the family. And there's other benefits to it for the families, and that's where we have to come on. But yeah, we'll keep plugging away at it, but I don't mean to point us out, but every single district we went into, their customer report, same problem.
Oh, sure.
Same thing.
And that's why the legislature is talking about it, and it's a big push of the legislature to make change to that, at least for this COVID years. Too, so the worst case scenario is the absolutely right way to do it, with the idea that people are aware of that reality too.
Hopefully you get
Yeah.
addressed.
Yeah.
And I know we either one of your conversations with lawmakers in the area or whomever you talk to, committees and things, what, are we hearing anything that indicates this might be harmless? Is that likely at all?
We were hearing it early on, that they were gonna full fund this, and we just haven't heard anything on it now, so hopefully they'll open back up, because we've been advocating.
Everybody seems to have gone to their corners.
Yeah.
Until they do it.
Yeah, it's gonna be a scramble. Because they have to do something, otherwise they're closing down government at the end of the month.
I reached out to a few other districts outside, just to see what they were doing for their revenue. They're 1%, not seeing the compensatory, but like I said, one was 1.5 million. I think the district, yeah. But we'll continue to do what we've done. Again, advocating this field. Number two, some of our legislatures pointing out, look at your surplus. Look at what your paying districts saving, you're saving, not paying. Not asking for anything above, we're still asking to try and get within an inflationary. But 2% is, that's a minimum. And now we're pulling another $500,000. The other thing would be great, honestly, going back to free and reduces, independently get to do something. But to help get that word out of what we need done. Teachers and buildings do a nice job trying to get those forms out also. But it comes down to they have to come out.
School districts are always held captive by the legislature. We're an add-on budget wise. They rob Peter to pay Paul. We're Peter.
Social media links may be helpful too. Your comment about the independent, covering it, but then linking the online application, with the things that we've talked about. I mean, like, hey, you might be surprised that you qualify, and hey, this is what helps the district, and hey, this is where it can help individuals, and get the word out that these programs. To me, it's always seemed so odd. You know what I mean? But it's the way that they choose. So I just don't think people necessarily realize that. And the more that we can get out there, even
I agree.
10 or 15 more people, it's
I
a
agree.
high percentage point or two.
Good, thank you, Deon. Moving on to our
Thanks,
fourth one.
Dan.
Board members, anybody have anything they'd like to bring up?
I had the Children's Collaborative meeting 2 weeks ago, and we will be getting, Deanna, we're gonna get an extra 2,000 budgetarily in the collaborative money. Did you hear me?
I did.
I'm gonna let you know.
2000.
Very good. Anybody else?
Pride and the Tiger, I think Jeremy mentioned it in his email this board. Just as a heads up, they're bringing back their golf tournament in July. Pride and the Tiger does a ton for our district, as we all know. And so I would just encourage anybody who would be interested to know that that's coming up, I think July.
I bought my raffle tickets.
You should have bought it for me,
And I've
because
got
I'm
them
selling them
available.
He hit me
too.
first.
I'm selling them too. Anyway, so just to remind everybody, if they can get teams together, make donations or buy raffle tickets, all supports
What's the
Pride.
date?
July 12th, I believe.
Bond oversight continues to meet, seeing lots of progress out there now. You're seeing parking lots and sidewalks going in and landscaping starting to take shape, and hopefully the last of the windows here very, very soon, so. The inside progress is moving right along, so hoping for mid-July completion. Thanks.
Are they having any issues getting furniture? I just heard supply issues all over the country. Is that gonna
We,
be okay?
We lucked out on the supply front. ICS did a great job working with contractors and subcontractors to make sure we had everything on site. So knock on wood, there's been very little impact to us on that front. Not because it's perfect, but minimal impact compared to what you're hearing around the country.
When do we plan to move stuff from west side to the east side?
In July. East.
Good. Is the roof sold? Discussion items is a second review of policies 414 through 419, 613, and 707 comments.
The graduation requirements, is that the change that Brian brought up to us last two meetings?
Those are in there.
Okay.
Yep, that's in there. Yep.
Moving on to our action items, our Marshall Custodian Association MOU, adding 2 salary advancements. Motion to approve this. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
It's open for discussion.
So every 3 years, we do a pay equity report. And we need to be in compliance. And when we submitted it, there was we were out of compliance due to the custodians had a 6-year for probationary, the high class or support staff at 16 years. So by having 2 classes at the end of our custodians, making it a total of 16 years, we fall back in compliance. Cost is very minimal.
Very good. Any questions? We'll vote on it. It is approved. Authorization to advertise and hire additional targeted services summer school positions.
No move. Second.
Open for discussion.
This was just as we're getting through final numbers of target services programming for the summer, some additional staff that are needed to handle class sizes.
All right, let's vote. Is approved. Approval to rescind the policy 808 face covering policy. Motion to approve this.
Second.
Third.
Fourth. Fifth. Sixth.
Here, we don't need any debate on that. We'll call for a vote.
Right, this is in response to the governor rescinding the mandate.
Is approved.
I just want to say how wonderful it was to be able to have a regular graduation this year compared to what we had to do with the seniors last year. What a gift to our kids,
Thanks, everyone.
right?
Move on to our personnel. Motion to approve.
I'll second.
Any discussion?
Typically, we don't do these at the first board meeting of the month, but there's so much going on right now, we want to get these moved forward, so keep hiring.
Please vote. Is approved. Thank you, board members.
Thank you.